Hey YouTube, Vinny M here, and welcome to another video here on the channel. Today we have another World War II reenacting informational video for you. And in today's video, we're going to be doing part 4 in our 4-part series about period correct tobacco products for your World War II reenacting and living history needs. Today, part 4 will cover pipes and pipe tobaccos. Be sure to check out part 1 on cigars, part 2 on cigarettes, and part 3 on tobacco accessories for a full overview of tobacco products throughout the Second World War. Jumping straight into today's topic, pipes and pipe tobaccos. In front of you, you see many different types of pipe tobaccos, as well as some different types of pipes and a couple accessories. We're going to talk about how these relate to the World War II history, the timeline with tobacco products, and what is appropriate for World War II reenacting and what is not. So right out of the gate, the first thing we need to do is talk about what brands of pipe tobacco were actually available during the World War II time period, because you can't smoke a tobacco pipe without something to put in it. Then we're going to look at the advertisements from the time period, and then I'm going to jump into the actual packaging, because one thing that might surprise you is that tins are typically not correct for World War II reenacting. These wonderful metal tins that most reenactment units tell their guys to buy were actually only used early on and very quickly replaced. And we're going to talk about why later in this video. But first, we need to talk about those brands. If you were to Google, what brand of pipe tobacco did U.S. troops smoke in World War II, 90% of the time, you're going to get two names: Prince Albert and Half and Half. But there are tons of pipe tobaccos. As a matter of fact, leading into World War II, pipe smoking was more prominent than cigarette smoking. So every single cigarette maker had one, if not two, lines of pipe tobacco. And there were pipe tobacco lines from companies that didn't even make cigarettes. And because of that, there were more pipe tobaccos than there were cigarettes. But if there are all of these different pipe tobaccos, why, in the reenacting community, do we get told that if we want to smoke a pipe at a reenactment, to buy Half and Half or a Prince Albert tin? It's really simple. Prince Albert was made by R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company in my hometown of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And they manufactured Camel cigarettes and Pall Malls. Camel's being one of the most prominent brands of the time period. Half and Half? Well, you've seen this bright and burly Target emblem before, because it's the emblem of Lucky Strike. Half and Half was manufactured by the American Tobacco Company. And prior to World War II, instead of it saying bright and burly, it actually said Lucky Strike and had a collapsible tin. These two brands of pipe tobacco get overrepresented in World War II reenacting because they coincide with the two most prominent brands of cigarettes. But you see many other brands here. So what brands of cigarettes did those coincide with? Well, Velvet was a product of Liggett & Myers, who manufactured Chesterfields. Granger, which I'm not representing here because I don't have a container for, was also a product of Liggett & Myers. Sir Walter Raleigh was a product of Brown & Williamson, who also made Kool cigarettes, one of the first brands to have filters and one of the first menthol brands. Union Leader was a product of the L. Lorillard Company, who manufactured Old Gold cigarettes. And Bond Street and Revelation were both products of Philip Morris, who manufactured Philip Morris cigarettes, as well as a women-specific line of cigarettes marketed mostly towards women that you might have heard of today, known as Marlboro. And now you can see just how prominent pipe tobaccos were. While Philip Morris was only really marketing one brand of cigarettes towards men at the time, They had 2 pipe tobaccos, as did Liggett and Myers. And that's not even speaking of all of the companies that made pipe tobaccos and didn't make cigarettes. Let's take a minute and look at the marketing from the time period and see what that tells us about the evolutions of the packages and what is correct for the World War II time period. As we go through these advertisements, something's going to be very apparent to you, and that's that the tin actually went away during the war. This is a 1939 ad for Bond Street showing a tin, but this 1945 ad for Revelation and Bond Street, both products of Philip Morris, shows cardboard boxes, as does this, which is another 1945 ad. If we look at this Velvet ad from 1920, we see that their package was a tin with the word Velvet wrote in smoke. But then in this 1940 ad, we see they've changed to a tin with a shield. And eventually, this company, Liggett and Myers, would completely switch to a cardboard box as well. Here's one of the last advertisements depicting a tin dated 1940. And here is a Granger ad showing the cardboard box in 42. Now, Granger was another product of the same company that made Velvet, so that shows us they switched to the cardboard box. You see the same thing across all of these brands. Sir Walter Raleigh, for example, with this wartime ad depicting a box, but the one before it, a late 1930s ad showing a tin. Now, Half and Half was a bit of an exception because they did use some cardboard boxes as seen here in 1937, but that was for bulk packaging. This Meerschaum pipe advertisement here from 1939 shows they were using a tin for their smaller packaging, and a collapsible tin at that, as seen in this 1941 ad. So when did that switch take place? Well, as best you can tell from looking at the dates on these various advertisements, the switch from tins to alternate packaging had occurred by all companies by the end of 1942. As a matter of fact, the latest date that we can find on a tobacco ad showing a tin is dated December of 1942, and that ad is from the company that makes Holiday and Edgeworth, Edgeworth being quite prominent at the time. Edgeworth was a bit unique. They had a really nice blue tin. I wish I had one to show you, but they also had a flat tin that opened on the top, kind of forward, that was for plug tobacco. And this here is the latest ad I can find depicting a soldier during the wartime with a tin dated December of 42. But Edgeworth was unique because they didn't switch to a cardboard box like everybody else. They switched to this soft pack. It was a laminated pouch that had a single fold over designed to keep the tobacco fresh. And as you can see in this post-war ad from the late 40s, early 50s, it was designed to scoop with your pipe, which gave it an advantage over tins. What's interesting is that that's the same package that all tobacco manufacturers use for pipe tobacco today. So while Edgeworth is not that well known and not represented in reenacting like it should be, it does have a lasting history on the pipe tobacco industry as they invented the package that we see most today. Now that we've seen the advertisements both from before the war and during the war, we can pretty definitively say that by early 1943, the switch had been made by pretty much all companies from metal tins to cardboard boxes or alternative packaging. Now, that doesn't really bode well for your World War II reenacting and living history displays because these cardboard boxes are incredibly expensive and extremely hard to find. And using one of those where it could get damaged is probably not a smart thing to do. So you have to kind of have an alternative. And we can be period correct with a metal tin. We just have to know what we're looking at because the metal tin existed before the war, not during the war, and came back after the war. And there are distinct differences between the tins used before the war and those used after the war. So we want to make sure that we are picking a tobacco tin that is the right time period to pass as an early war tin, that 1940 to 1942 time period, because we can pass that off with a backstory for our entire impression throughout the war, right? We can say, well, I have this velvet tin. They don't put it in a tin anymore, but they did, and I kept the tin because I can refill it with what's in the cardboard boxes that we have now in 1944, right? Like we can build that backstory. So as long as we go with an early war tin, we're good to go. We can just skip the cardboard box. But what happens more often than not is that reenactors will just go buy a half and half tin or a velvet tin or a Prince Albert tin and think they're good to go. But what they've bought is a tin made after the war in the 1950s, 60s, or even the 70s. And people that know their tobacco packaging history and know their tobacco collectibles can spot this mistake instantly. Now, one question I do need to answer for those people that might not know before I jump into explaining the difference in the periods of tin is to explain why we saw tins go away during the war anyway. Well, it's pretty simple. The metal being used in these tins was really valuable to the war effort. You could use it in munitions, you could use it in military vehicles and weapons, and even in the gear that soldiers wore. And that is why it disappeared for a few years during the war, and they switched to cardboard. So the metal that these companies were using could go to companies whose product were more important for the war effort. But that doesn't mean that the companies making these tins did away with them altogether, because some of the companies continue to make the tins for the military. The medical department specifically was acquiring tobacco tins in order to protect fragile items on the soldiers themselves. Basically, your aid man, your surgical technician, what we would think of as combat medics. They were issued these to keep morphine syrettes and iodine swabs in because those items could be crushed. So the Army was allowing these tin manufacturers to still make a certain number of tins for them to use. But they did go away within the tobacco industry between early 43 and the end of the war. So now we have that out of the way, let's talk about how you can tell what you're looking at. First off, if you were going to buy half and half tin, it has to be a Lucky Strike. Has to be. Because the Lucky Strike logo went away when they switched to the cardboard box, and they changed it to say Burley and Bright. So if a tin says Burley and Bright on it, it automatically is a post-war tin manufactured whenever half and half returned to using the tins after the war. So if you're doing half and half, that's something you need to be aware of. And you're going to have to study the history of the packaging for all of these products to make sure that you have the right package for whichever product line that you want to portray in your impression. Because, for example, with Velvet, these two tins are pretty indistinguishable from each other. But if you know what you're looking at, this is the logo they used before the war and during the war, and this is the logo they used after. So automatically, just off the logo, I know this tin right here is a post-war tin. Another kind of giveaway with this one is that the top of the lid is stamped. So that's something else that you can look at. Some of the tins, they changed how things were marked. So the older tin for Velvet had a striker on the bottom, and the top of the lid was smooth. And then after the war, when they returned to using tins, you had a ounce count, so it tells you how many ounces weight this was, and Velvet was stamped in the bottom. So those are things that you need to look at within the company that you're actually looking at using in your impression. But one of the big telltale signs that a tin is absolutely not a World War II time period tin, that, you know, pre-World War II or up to 1942 time period is what I mean when I say that, is that it has a barcode. That means it is at least a 1970s tin. And the other telltale sign is that it has this type of lid. This is called the humidor lid by some, or the fresh lid, and it is a lid that is on top of a tin that has no visible hinge. It also has these little indentions here with a rib that gives it strength that tells you to push up, and these seal very tightly. If you look at how hard it is to open this half and half lid, it's pretty easy. If you look at how hard it is to open this Prince Albert lid, you'll dent the tin in trying to open it and have to bend it back out, not to mention put creases in your fingers. This was by design because this lid was designed to age your tobacco and keep it fresh. These lids came about in the 1960s, and any tin that has one of these is at least 1960s up. So that is an automatic telltale sign that this is not a period correct tin, despite the fact that it does not have a barcode. So that's something you can look for. At the end of the day, it's really not that difficult. All you have to do is make sure there's no barcode, make sure it doesn't have this kind of lid, and then once you've established those two things, just make sure that the logo on the tin fits the time period, such as I've already mentioned with this being the right velvet logo and this being the right half and half logo. Once you do those things, you can kind of pass that story off of, yeah, this is my half and half. I actually bought this right before the war, but I held on to the tin so I could keep refilling it, because these cardboard boxes we have now, they ain't shit. They just disintegrate as soon as it rains. And there you go. Next up, we have some pipe accessories. This was already covered in the accessories video, so I'm going to make this really short, sweet, simple, and to the point. The kind of trifold pipe tools that we have today that have a scraper, a tamper, and a pick on them, those were seen primarily in use with the Germans during the Second World War. So if you are a German reenactor, great for you. You can use those. The Americans are not really seen with that type of tool. You typically see them with something that looks like a nail, which is probably one of these guys right here. This is called an Amos pipe tool, and it is basically a ultra large nail type thing. It's not actually a nail. It was not some modified nail. It was made this way, but it looks like a nail. Has a big tamp on the end and a scraper on the end. Or you have this design here, which is more of a horseshoe looking nail, and it has a tiny scraper and a square tamper on it. And it would be as easy as just tamping with this and scraping with the other end, and it goes the same for both of them. The Amos works better because it's round and the inside of your pipe is round, so it's easier to get the edges, where the horseshoe or hobnail type is not quite as easy because it's square. If you're doing a US GI impression, these are going to be your most correct tools, or literally use a large nail, which some people say was done in the Pacific quite a bit. I honestly am not sure if that's the case, or if they were seeing these things thinking they were nails. Next, we're going to look at some tobacco pipes, the device that you need in order to enjoy your preferred pipe tobacco that we have already looked at. Now, World War II was kind of a strange time for pipes. In front of you is quite a nice spread of tobacco pipes. It kind of runs the gamut. We have some smooth briars from Italy. Those run about 40 to 100 bucks a pop. We have some ornate bent stem briar. Those are about the same price. We have some Algerian briar pipes that are straight stemmed, that are ornate. These are about 15 to 20 bucks, which is probably one of the best pipes you're going to get for the price. And then we have a hardwood pipe that uses a little bit different design, where the stem comes in higher than the bottom of the bowl. And this is just a really cheap pipe at like 10 bucks if you're just wanting to get into pipes on the cheap. But while all of these pipes existed in the World War II time period and before, not all of these pipe designs are appropriate for a World War II U.S. military reenacting impression. And that's because the predominant pipe of the time was the straight stem, smooth briar pipe. A lot of people are not going to like to hear that, because the bent stem pipes look much more, how should I say, sophisticated. But it is incredibly difficult to find a photo of a bent stem pipe, especially an ornate one, being used by a member of the U.S. military during the Second World War. Don't believe me? Let's have a look. As we go through these photos, something's going to be very obvious. U.S. forces aren't typically seen with bent pipes. Even high-ranking ones like Patton, seen here, and Arleigh Burke, seen here. Now, we do have the typical variations in straight pipes that we have today. Arleigh Burke's had a rounded bowl. Patton's had a straight wall bowl. Here we have Chesty Puller with a straight walled bowl. Here we have a very long stem. We also see bowls that are angled forward, such as on this pipe on this Marine, and this pipe here also seen in the Pacific. So all of those variations of straight pipes exist. We just do not see photos of American forces using bent pipes. Now, they certainly existed because we have photos from even the Civil War, as far back as that was, depicting bent stem pipes. But during World War II, we just don't see U.S. forces using them. As a matter of fact, it's almost a challenge to find a photo of U.S. forces with bent pipes during the Second World War. I looked pretty deep into why that might be, and the best I could come up with is just the manufacturers of the time period and what was selling good for them and what they made. Plus, it is easier to machine or carve, if you will, a straight pipe than a bent pipe. So if a company is given the option and the straight's selling better anyway, then that's probably what they're going to go with. But even custom pipes like this one from Douglas MacArthur were straight. Even countries that weren't the U.S. are seen with a lot of straight pipes. These are Finnish soldiers, and here we have a British soldier. So it just seems like straight pipes are very prominent throughout the world. But we do see a lot of German soldiers using bent pipes, and mostly with windscreens, as seen here. It has a screen over the actual bowl. We also see German soldiers that had very elaborate pipes, such as this one seen here. But we also see them with straight pipes, as that man in the back has, but there's the bent here in the front. It is easy to find German soldiers with bent pipes, but not Americans. So as you can see from the photos, there are no photos of U.S. forces with ornate bent pipes. I can find almost no photos of U.S. forces with bent pipes, and I cannot speak to the validity of having ornate straight pipes because many of the photos are too blurry or not close enough to tell if the pipes actually have engraving on them. What I can tell you is that if you're doing research for a pipe to use in a World War II impression, the way I have these pipes laid out right now is pretty much the order in which they go from least correct to most correct. On the least correct side, we have ornate bent stem pipes, followed by bent stem smooth pipes, followed kind of all in one here with your ornate straight pipes and your hardwood pipes that use a different shape, kind of an outside the norm shape. And then over here we have our most correct pipes, these smooth briar pipes, the pipes that are seen the most in the photos. Now there's people that are going to want to argue with that. They're going to say their grandpa had a pipe that looked like this and it's period correct and so forth and so on. But in World War II reenacting, we do research in order to determine what we're going to use for an impression. And the research shows that these pipes, these bent pipes and ornate pipes, are just not the prominent pipe for the time period. As a matter of fact, almost non-existent. So you can argue with me all you want, but I put 6 hours of research into just the pipe portion of this video in order to acquire all the photos you just looked at. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. That's all I have for you guys. Hopefully you found the video useful. As always, like and subscribe, and have a nice day.